scary stories. Okay, a bit of backstory. This story involves me and my friend. We were both 12 and 11. And we were both alone at the park, and it wasn't far from my house, and our village is pretty small where everyone knows everyone, so our parents weren't worried about us, and we were in England, so not as much fear for kids being alone. Big mistake. Me and my friend were both messing around on the swings and car, watching as there was a private road to some fancy houses, so some nice looking cars came down every now and then. I noticed this nice looking bright white BMW come down the road and commented to my friend that it must be a pain in the ass to clean and keep that way. She laughed at me, swearing, as we were still young enough to find it funny and think we were rebels for it. About a minute later, the car drove back up the road. I noticed it and just wrote it off as them maybe picking something up and then leaving again. Then it came back down, slower. The driver drove up and down the road a total of about 5 times. At that point, we both looked at each other kind of scared and wondering what the fuck this guy was doing. We were told whenever we were in town to be careful of anyone you don't know approaching you. You know, the classic line you get bored of and just find annoying when it's repeated 24/7. We both decided it was weird, and so we grabbed her phone. I grabbed her water bottle, and we started walking up the lane. The way to get to my house was either cross the road after you go up the path, walk up the driveway a bit and through the back gate, or up the lane further, turn left, walk along, then go down our drive and through the front door. We got about halfway up the lane when the car came back slower than ever, and then it stopped. When it stopped, I knew something wasn't okay, and I grabbed her hand and pulled her towards the field. To anyone else, it looked like we were running off to play on the hills at the back of the field, but we both knew there was a path behind some trees that led to a bunch of storage units and houses where one of our other friends lived. About halfway across the field, we turned back to see the guy had gotten out of his car and was jumping the wall. We ran to the trees and through the secret door. Right as we cleared the little alley, we heard it, a loud-ass gunshot. This motherfucker had a gun. In England, no one has fucking guns. This scared both of us shitless. We were fucking terrified, as we had never been warned about guns being told they were much harder to get here, and we don't have problems with them. That's true for the most part. We both ran again, up the road, through the storage units, out to the other friend's house. Neither of us breathed a fucking word about what had just happened and what we had experienced to anyone. Probably not a smart idea, but nothing ever happened. No deaths, crime, guns. Everything went back to normal. I probably should have told my parents, but I was dumb and I was young. And I'm not going to tell them now, about 3 years later, that a guy tried to shoot me and my friend. I wish the story ended there, but there was a little more. About a year later, me and some of my friends were shopping in the nearby town with her mom when I saw a familiar car, white as hell BMW, parked on the road. It triggered my memories, and I pointed it to my friend. He nervously laughed, and we walked past it. But then I heard the little noise that goes off when the doors get unlocked by the keys, so the light flashed out of the corner of my eye. I turned around and I saw him. It was the same guy. He was with a woman who looked a little younger than him, and she had on stilettos, and she was shorter than him. I whispered to my friend, and she dragged me around the corner after her other friends hushedly ranted to me, asking whether he'd seen me. If I had thought he recognized us, if I was sure it was him. She seemed more freaked out than me, and I did something I wish I didn't. I lied to her. He had definitely noticed us, but whether he recognized me, I didn't know. I told her that I didn't get a good look at him, and that it had been a year and I wasn't entirely sure. I knew it was him, and it still creeps me out to think that by sheer crap luck we ran into him again. I don't want to know what would have happened if I didn't pull my friend to the back lane and if we had gone across the road or to my house. Dear white BMW driver, I hope we never fucking meet again. Several years ago, I worked at a crisis unit for the acutely mentally ill. It was a 10-bed unit where individuals would come to stay as a step down from psychiatric hospitalization or a diversion to prevent psychiatric hospitalization. I often worked alone on the weekends. One Friday evening, we received an admission. We'll call him Mr. M. Background info was provided with the referral indicating a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder and recent release from prison after serving a sentence for murder. I completed the initial intake meeting with Mr. M, during which time he said some sexually explicit things to me. I made it clear that that was inappropriate and that confidentiality was limited, in that the staff working on the unit as part of his treatment team would be privy to anything said in the interview or subsequent one-on-one sessions. He responded well to the redirection. We finished the intake, and I went about the rest of my shift until about 11 p.m. that night, when he approached the office and asked if I was working alone. Luckily, at the time, I wasn't alone, and I told him that my male coworker was in the adjoining office. After this encounter, I explained the situation to my coworker, who read my shift summary and decided to sit down with Mr. M and tell him the way he was acting was not acceptable and he could risk being released from the program if it continued. The next morning, I was working alone from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Around 9 a.m., I went to wake up another client, we'll call him Jay, to administer his medication. The room Jay was assigned was at the end of the hallway, and he was usually slow to get up in the mornings. While knocking on Jay's door, Mr. M approached me to tell me he didn't appreciate that I had shared the things he said to me with my male coworker. I explained to Mr. M that he knew what he said was inappropriate and that he knew anything he said to me would be shared with the rest of the treatment team. Mr. M became more and more agitated and got in my face, backing me into the corner in front of Jay's bedroom door. At this point, Jay had woken up and heard what was happening outside his room. Jay came out of his room, stood between Mr. M and myself, and told Mr. M that he needed to walk away and to cool down. Mr. M went back to his room, and I contacted my supervisor, who told me to document the encounter and continue my shift. Needless to say, I left that job shortly after this incident. I am thankful for Jay and that he had the presence of mind to intervene on my behalf. I often wonder what would have happened if Jay wouldn't have woken up, or if he would have been in a more severe state of mental illness and would have become more agitated as well. Mr. M, let's not meet again. First, I would like to apologize because English isn't my native language, so maybe my writing may seem odd. So, when I was in high school, I wasn't a very hard-working student. I wasn't a troublemaker, but I was an incredibly lazy girl, working just the minimum so that my parents wouldn't get angry. I've always had some kind of easiness regarding schoolwork, and never knew what it truly meant to make any efforts, so I spent all my classes drawing on my copybooks without many consequences. My junior year's math teacher was pretty upset about this. He wanted me to work harder. I wasn't bad at math. I was around 13 or 14 over 20. I'm French, but I assume this is like having a B or a B minus. But sometimes my grades would be very low. During a teacher-parent meeting, he told my mom that I was wasting my capacities, that it was infuriating how lazy I was. My mom then replied that she agreed with him and that she wouldn't blame him for pushing me harder and for punishing me if it was for making me work harder. And from this day on, he did exactly what she said. In every math class, he would always question me first before everyone else. Was always sitting next to me when we were doing exercises. During the tests, he was always telling me, "You can do it, Alyssa." It made me feel incredibly uncomfortable because at this age, no one wants to be the attention's focus. My classmates started to realize that my math teacher was a little obsessed by me, and they would tease me a lot about it. The last class before Christmas break, the math teacher threw a little surprise Christmas party. It was a very nice party. He gave us chocolates and mock champagne. We have had a lot of fun. During the party, he poured me another glass of mock champagne, telling me that I deserved it because I was doing better. I accepted it and didn't drink it entirely. But during the next class, I was feeling very bad. I almost fainted and finished my last day of school before Christmas in the nurse's office. At the time, I wouldn't even think it was because of the alcohol-free champagne. I thought it was due to my diabetes that I indeed had too much of the chocolate, even if it didn't look like my usual crisis. A few weeks later, through some kind of charity event, it was a class project and we were very proud. In my country, we don't have proms, so it was our occasion to wear pretty formal clothes and to dance together. The math teacher was invited and he was helping some of the boys tend to the bar. He served me an alcohol-free cocktail, but before I could drink it, a classmate of mine, Flora, poured some vodka in it. Even though it was forbidden to bring alcohol at the event, I was so mad because with my diabetes I couldn't drink alcohol, so I told her that she could just throw the cocktail. At the time I thought that she did, but now when I think about it, I wonder if she didn't choose to drink it instead. So I kind of ghosted her and never asked her if she was doing better, etc. Now I feel bad because of this, but at the time I was immature, but because of that I will never know if she was ill because of the alcohol or because of my cocktail. A few weeks later, I failed my math test. It had been a long time since I had failed at math tests, and my math teacher was very, very angry. He yelled at me in front of everyone, saying how much of a disappointment I was, that I was hopeless, and that I would just end up living in a cardboard box under a bridge. Something was off. I was feeling it. He had a very weird look in his eyes. It chilled me, and I couldn't help it. I started crying. He calmed down a bit and told me that he would just give me an hour of detention, during which I will copy my lesson. I was a little surprised because normally detention is for bad behavior, not for bad grades. But I was a little relieved because it was a small punishment. My parents would never know. Indeed, I lived kind of far from my high school, and there were only one bus every night between my high school and my home at 5 p.m. Because of that, even when I finished at 4 p.m., I would never go home before 5 p.m. And when I've had detention between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m., my parents would never know. But then when he officially gave me the detention hour, he said that he wanted to be personally present during my detention hour, and that the only possible hour was during 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. I was really nervous because I would have to tell my parents to come and get me at 6 p.m., and then they would know everything. As I said earlier, I was a troublemaker, so at first I planned to go to the detention hour during the day. My friends and I talked a lot about it, and I was feeling more rebellious, so I decided not to tell my parents that I was in detention and that one of my friends would pick me up at 6 p.m. and drive me home at 5 p.m. When heading towards the detention room, I was angry, mumbling that it wasn't fair to be in detention because of one of my bad grades. When I arrived in front of the detention room, I realized I was the only one waiting. I then realized that I would be the only student in detention alone with the math teacher, who was a little obsessive, and it was getting dark outside. It was a big nope for me. And when I saw him coming, I panicked. I said something like, "Sorry, I have an emergency. I have to go now. I will email the school for rescheduling my detention hour." And then I ran the fuck off. He started to yell at me that I had to obey him and to go to detention, or that he would call my parents. In this moment, I didn't care. I sprinted towards the bus and stopped and catch the bus and went home. I was afraid that he would have called my parents, so when I arrived, I was shaken, but my parents greeted me normally, so I assumed that eventually he didn't call them. He never came back the next day, nor the next weeks. Eventually, I learned that he quit his position. A shrink came during an hour to ask us if we wanted to talk about the math teacher, but as nobody knew what was going on with me and him, we didn't have much to say, and the shrink left, and we never heard from him again, until a few months ago I became a teacher. And one day, chatting with my coworker, I mentioned his name, talking about my weird, bizarre math teacher, and how I skipped a detention hour, and one of my oldest coworker went very pale hearing his name. In fact, a few days after the detention hour incident, a math teacher was arrested for downloading a few pedopornographic videos from the dark web and some kind of snuff movies starring children and young teens. Maybe this detention hour was just a detention hour, and I would have gotten out of it with no problem. But I will never know, and will always wonder what would have happened if I stayed there or didn't catch my bus. I am a 21-year-old senior in college living with 3 other girls in an old story house. We are located about 15 minutes walk from main campus, and the majority of our neighbors are college students. That being said, this town is notorious for being a little, well, sketchy. Millie is home to one of the first insane asylums built in America. After the majority of it being closed down, abandoned for years, the final building was shut down about a month ago, and the remaining patients were released. Now, I doubt this is directly correlated with my creepy experience, but I am not the only one who has interesting encounters with strangers since their release in this town. 2 nights ago, after getting off work around 11:30, I came home to my roommates getting ready to go out for a night out. I realized how stupid it was, but we often had an open door policy, free for anyone to come over and visit as they please. We would lock the door at night, but the one time we forgot really came to bite us in the ass. Around midnight, I was hopping in the shower as my roommates were headed out the door. We said our goodbyes, and I told them I would be meeting up with them later. I had just stepped out of the shower when I heard what sounded like the front door slamming shut. I automatically assumed one of the girls had forgotten something, so I call out their names. No response. I then hear footsteps in the hallway. I call out again. No response. Fear and dread came over me, and I immediately grabbed my clothes and ran into my bedroom. I threw my clothes on, leaned my ear to the door, and waited in silence to hear if someone was in the house. I hear nothing. I decided that it must have been one of my roommates grabbing something and leaving again, so I head into the living room to get my phone. 6 missed calls, and it's still ringing. My roommate, Carrie, was on the other end. I answered and immediately could hear the panic in her voice. "Lee, are you in the house?" Me. "Yeah, Carrie, why?" "You need to get out. Sam drove by and said a man saw us walking through the front door. He called the police, but you need to leave." I shit my pants. Nothing was going through my head besides more adrenaline and fear. I wasn't sure of the man's intentions, but I sure wasn't going to wait to find out. While remaining on the phone with my roommate, I bolted out the front door and hid behind my car. I watched the house from afar, waiting anxiously to see any movement. My thought process was not at its finest at that point, and I realized I probably could have made smarter decisions. As my friend approached in a truck, I sprinted out from behind my car and jumped in the back of their truck. Just as I did, a dark figure scurried out into the woods, running in the opposite direction. I can only assume he had been inching closer to us as I was waiting for them to arrive. I screamed bloody murder, and we floored it out of there. I refused to go back into that house until the police arrived, and it had been triple checked. There were no signs of anything being touched or stolen, which makes me wonder what the man's intentions were. You can guarantee that I've locked my door every night since, and to the stranger who walked into my house while I was in the shower, let's not meet again. This happened on a nice spring day back in 2013. I was about 17 years old at the time and had skipped school. I was just laying in bed doing whatever I used to do on my laptop when my younger brother, 5 years younger, knocked on my bedroom window, saying that there was a man in our backyard. It was still early in the day and still light outside, so initially I wasn't very worried. Our neighborhoods consisted of old people and families with children. I went upstairs and went with my brother in the living room, who told me that the man was still outside in our yard with his beagle puppy. I peeked through the blinds of our floor to the ceiling windows, and surely there was a man walking around with his puppy on a leash. He looked like your average suburban dad out for a walk with his dog, except his eyes were lost, almost like he was dead inside. I stood there watching him for a little while until I see him walking slowly towards the house and up the stairs to where the back entrance was. He was now on the porch, just meters from where I was standing, hiding out of sight indoors. He slowly walked to the door, looked through the window, and then proceeded to walk back down into the yard. At this point, me and my brother were starting to get scared. When some minutes had passed, I gathered my courage and went outside to ask him what he was doing. At this point, I should mention that my sister, 8 years younger, had just gotten our second batch of rabbits, tiny baby rabbits that she loved more than anything. I say second batch because the first two vanished one day, leaving the door to the outdoor cage open. We figured that some neighborhood kids went to visit the rabbits and left the door unhinged. Thus the rabbits escaped. We later found one of them missing several body parts, lying on the bottom of our neighbor's basement stairs. Again, we shrugged it off and thought it was just the cats had gotten a hold of it. I opened the door, adrenaline pumping, and asked calmly if the man needed some help and what he was doing in our backyard. He calmly explained that he was just training his puppy and that it was a bird and a rabbit hunting dog. As confused as I was, I stared at him and didn't say anything in response. This is when I see the dog stepping proudly out from behind the tree with one of our baby rabbits just hanging dead from its mouth. I did not expect this, and I had no idea how to react to this, and I just said, okay, and hurried up inside, and I told my brother. When I got in, I told him to call our dad, and he immediately called our neighbors to come and help us. We waited inside for about 10 minutes, keeping our eyes on the man as he walked calmly around our yard with his dog and the rabbit. When our neighbor finally comes, he tries to escape through the back entrance. Our neighbors chase him around the neighborhood for a little while until he finally catches him. The police were called, and we found out that he had been training his dog all around the area for a couple of weeks, and a lot of rabbits were missing. He was finally submitted into a psychiatric ward for his ex-wife after some weeks. He got out after about a year or so, and my mom sees him around quite often. So yeah, strange rabbit man. Let's not meet again.